Hilchos Me'ila Perek Shishi, the laws of sacrilege, misusing consecrated items, chapter 6. Today's chapter has basically three big topics. The first is very general. The whole idea of Me'ila, we talk about for a number of chapters already, basically means using something that belongs to Hashem for your own purposes. But when you talk about objects that could be used, there are two types of objects. One type of object you use and nothing happens to the object. Something else could be where you use the object and then the object itself actually suffers. There's wear and tear that happens as a result of your usage. These two terms are called hana and pagam. Hana means just deriving benefit. You have an object, you simply used it for your own needs, nothing happened to the object. You had pleasure from Hektish's stuff. And this is what's called pagam. Pagam means blemish. Because you used this object belonging to Hashem, now it went down in value, now it went down just simply in its physical quantity. So we're going to see that there are certain objects that only hana applies to them, and then the me'ila will be committed the moment you have pleasure from them. There are other objects where you must do pagam, you must also blemish it in order to transgress the prohibition of me'ila. If you simply have benefit without the blemish, there's no me'ila. That's the first big topic today. The second topic today is what we call moyel achar moyel. Moyel achar moyel means misusing something after it's already been misused. So if I go and I, God forbid, take something that belongs to Hashem and commit me'ila by misusing it for myself, can you now say, hey, once I already used it, it's no longer holy. Now I'll use it for myself and it's not considered me'ila. So we'll see. In some cases, the laws of moyel achar moyel applies, which means that even if you're the second guy in the row to misuse it, you also transgressed. Other cases, no. There's no such thing as moyel achar moyel. Once one person misuses it, it leaves the realm of holiness and nobody else can commit me'ila on that. And the third big topic in today's chapter is going to be what happens if you inadvertently or thinking that something actually belongs to you, but really it belonged to Hashem and you ended up using it. At what point do you commit me'ila? And we're going to see, it depends on what the object is. But those are the three big topics for today. So we begin with hana and pagam. Says the Rambam halacha aleph yesh dvarim. There are certain things sheha'adam ne'eneh bahen v'lo yipagmu, that a person could use them, have benefit from them, and nothing will happen to them. They won't become blemished. One example, definitely in ancient times, if you used a pure gold utensil. It doesn't get oxidized, nothing happens to the material itself. You simply made use of it to put your salad in the bowl. Only hana, no pagam. But there are other things, other materials that if you use them, they will become blemished. Could go in begadim, like clothing. Every time you put on a suit and you take it off, there's wear and tear. Other metals, silver, copper, iron, and things like them, they do have, every time you contact them, every time you use them, something happens to the material itself and it degenerates, and there's natural wear and tear that's happening to the utensil in real time. So the Rambam says, so if you have benefit, a pruta's worth, about a nickel in today's time, from something consecrated, which is not attached to the ground, because that's a basic condition. We saw the other day that if it's attached to the ground, there's no me'ila at all. But let's say it meets the criteria, it's not attached to the ground, and you had the right amount of pleasure from it, you're still not up to committing the crime of me'ila yet. You have to check what kind of material is it. If you derive benefit from something which has no blemish, you used a golden utensil belonging to Hektish Mal, so you've committed me'ila right then and there, because there's no blemish that could possibly happen, so the minute you had pleasure, you've committed the crime. But if you derive benefit from something which will have a blemish, will have a natural wear and tear, maybe you put on a suit belonging to Hektish, or you used an axe belonging to Hektish to chop down your tree. Of course, the axe, every time you chop a tree, the blade gets dulled. So you're actually giving a real blemish to the axe. So now the me'ila is not considered to be me'ila ad sheyifgaim b'hektish, until you blemish the Hektish material, b'shave pruta, be'oisei davar atzmai sheneh bay. It has to be a pruta's worth of blemish. It has to go down in value by at least 5 cents. And it has to be the same area of the material which you used for the benefit. That's where the blemish has to happen. We'll soon see an example of how you could have pleasure and blemish divorced from each other. Because typically, that's how you think about it. If you use an axe, you chop a tree. So obviously the axe itself, which gave you the benefit, is also what got the blemish. But there are cases where the blemish is separate from the benefit. So the Rambam is saying the blemish has to be in that thing or in that element where the benefit came from. You also have to have intent to be deriving benefit. And the blemish and the pleasure needs to come at once. And again, that's typically how it is. But because there are certain cases where they can be separate from each other, the Rambam has to say that the only time that it's qualifying for transgressing Me'ilah is if all these conditions are met. It's the proper amount of blemish. The blemish is in the same area or element as the benefit. They come together at once and you're having intent to benefit. What are the opposite cases of these? Nena bekechatzi pruta, upagam bekechatzi pruta. Let's say you would only have half a pruta's worth of benefit and half a pruta's worth of blemish. Oishanena b'shave pruta, upagam b'shave pruta. Or you met the right amounts. You had a pruta amount of benefit, a pruta amount of blemish, but it was b'davar acher, in a different element of the object. You didn't have benefit from that which you blemished, and you didn't blemish that which you had benefit from, and we'll soon see in a moment. An example of this, there's no me'ilah, until you have a pruta's worth of benefit, and the blemish, which is also a pruta's worth, has to be in the exact same thing where the benefit came from. And now we get an example. Ketzad, what's an example of this? So, today it's kind of less common to have such things, but I guess if I use an example here of the Air Force, they have these fancy patches that go on their suits, and the patch is actually separate from the suit. So the Rambam gives an example similar to that. Hare shehitir matlis mi beged hektish. You have a hektish suit, hektish piece of clothing, and there's a patch on the suit. Now you like the patch. You don't care about the suit. Suit's not your size, but you like the patch. So you take the patch off of the suit, v'tafra bebigdai. You sew it onto your suit, the lavsha, and now you wear the suit with the patch. V'nen naba b'shava pruta. So here, there's benefit at a pruta's worth that you're getting on your suit from Hektish's patch. So the benefit is coming from the patch. V'hifsid ba'beged shehitira mimena b'shava pruta. And of course, by taking the patch off of the Hektish suit, you've now damaged the Hektish suit. It's gone down in value because there's no nice, beautiful patch on it anymore. But the patch itself you didn't damage. So watch what happened. You had benefit from the patch, and you blemished the suit, both belonging to Hektish, but the Hana and the Pagam were on two different things. So now, there's no Me'ilah here. Because you've had benefit from one element, in this case the patch, and you blemished the other element, in this case the suit. So therefore, there's no Me'ilah. Says the Rambam, we've already explained yesterday, if you derive benefit and at the same time you provide benefit to a friend, the two benefits combine. And if Hektish was cheated a pruta between the two of you, Me'ilah accrues to both of you. We also explained yesterday that Me'ilah crosses time. If you were under the impression that something was yours and you misused it, and a week later you misused it again, thinking that it's still yours, since both misuses were done under the same impression, they combine. And if in total you did a pruta's worth of damage, you've committed Me'ilah. Halacha beis, kadshei kadashim hatmimim. Let us assume that you have the highest level sacrifice and it's complete, there's no blemish. This is a sheep. It's going to be brought as a offering, as a korban. It's got wool, and it's in perfect condition. Shetalash mitzamran. Comes the Jew, and he plucks out some wool for himself. Kevon shenena bipruta moal. So the question is, what category does this sheep go into? Is it a category where there's only hana, or there's also pagam? Is this sheep a type of thing which you only have benefit from it, there's no blemish, or there is also blemish? So typically you would think there's also blemish. It's a physical animal. You pluck out here, maybe you bring down its worth, something happens to it. But the Rambam says interestingly, no. Since the only thing you can do with this animal is bring it as a sacrifice, so there is no way to bring it down in value. Because even if you pluck hair from an animal that's meant to be a sacrifice, nothing happens to it. It's still brought as a sacrifice. So therefore, the moment you have a pruta's benefit, you've committed Me'ilah. Even though you haven't made a blemish. Because in this scenario, the sheep is like a golden cup, which cannot become blemished. Because all you can do is offer it, and plucking hair from an animal meant to be offered doesn't disqualify it from being offered. But let's say this animal then gets a mum, so now it can no longer be brought as a sacrifice. What do you do with a sacrifice that gets a blemish? You sell it. Now it's going to be sold on the market, so now everything you do to it matters. Since it's meant to be sold now, it's destined to be sold. The hagiza pagem is demeyen, and if you're going to shear the wool, or in this case pluck the wool, it's going to bring down the value, because of course the buyer is considering, how much wool do I have on the sheep? Maybe I can shear it and make some money off of that. So now the mum itself transforms the sheep from being something which is blemishless to being something which could be blemished. And what did we learn? That if something could be blemished, there's no me'ilah until you both have the benefit and commit the blemish at a pruta's worth. If you pluck the hair after the animal died, this reverts back to the original status. Just the benefit itself makes the me'ilah, she'ein pegam lemesa. Because there's no such thing as blemishing the value of a dead animal. It's dead. In either scenario, the Rambam reminds us of what we said the other day, that this is only rabbinic me'ilah. These are not even in the category of biblical me'ilah, it's only rabbinic sacrilege. And now we move on to the laws of moyel achar moyel, misusing something after it's already been misused. And what we're going to see is that there's a major difference between kodshe bedek habayis and kodshe mizbeach. Two concepts we had already a few times in the last few chapters. Whenever you make something holy, it's going to one of two things. Either it's going to the altar as a sacrifice, kodshe mizbeach, or it's going to temple maintenance and upkeep. Just the temple's bank account. And if they can use it for actual upkeep, they'll use it. If they can use it for selling and making an income, they'll use it for that. But that's all in the realm of bedek habayis. So what we're going to see when it comes to moyel achar moyel is that there's a huge difference between whether the thing that was consecrated went for the upkeep fund, maintenance fund, or if it went to the altar. The Rambam begins with bedek habayis. Hamoyel b'kodshe bedek habayis, if somebody commits me'ilah, somebody misuses something that was consecrated to temple upkeep, kevan shemal bishgaga, if he did so inadvertently, nischal el hektish, the holiness becomes profaned. It's not holy anymore. V'zeh shaneh acharav pater, and if anybody will come afterwards and derive benefit from it further, he'll be totally exempt. Ma'al bizadin, but if the me'ilah was done purposely, you knew what you were doing, hayil ve'einei chayav b'karban me'ilah, since nothing's going to be replaced, because you're not going to be obligated to bring a sacrifice, as we saw in chapter 1, you just get lashes. Lo nischal el hektish. So what you did doesn't have consequence to the object. The hektish itself doesn't become profaned. Elaharehu b'hava yossi, it is in its state of being, it's holy. And if somebody comes afterwards and has benefit inadvertently, they have also committed me'ilah. So when it comes to bedek habayis, there's a core difference between shegeg and mezid. If you did it inadvertently, that's it, it's done, it's out of the realm of holiness. If you did it purposely, it's not yet out of the realm of holiness. Even that, when do we say that? When do we say this difference? If it changed hands, you misused something holy, spent it, or had it leave your domain, treating it as totally mundane, and passed on the ownership to somebody else. But if you simply derived benefit and blemished it, and you didn't pass it on to anybody else, then even in kodshe bedek habayis, even if it was done inadvertently, there's also a concept of misusing it after a misuse. So basically you have to ask yourself two questions, if I can say this halacha backwards. If you're dealing with kodshe bedek habayis, and you want to know, can it be misappropriated again? So the rabbi will first ask, hey, did it leave your domain? If it didn't leave your domain, then no matter who comes afterwards, he's also considered to have committed me'ilah. If it left your domain, now the rabbi has to ask, did you do it b'shegeg or b'mezid? Did you do it inadvertently or purposely? If you did it inadvertently, it's done. Nobody else can misuse it. If it's purposely, someone else can still misuse it. Halacha dalid, a general rule related to this, the ein moyel achar moyel b'mukdashim, when it comes to consecrated objects, the whole idea of moyel achar moyel only applies only to animals and to actual articles that can be used in day-to-day life. Ketzad, what's an example of this, where we'll apply this rule? Baka bekardoim shel hektish. A person used a hektish axe to chop some wood. Venena bipruta upagam. And he fulfilled all the criteria. He had a pleasure that amounted to a pruta. He also blemished it by chopping. He dulled the blade, let's say. And thereby he committed me'ila. Uba chaverai, uba kabai, venena upagam. His friend comes. He also chops some wood. Also damages the axe. So this is a case where you didn't transfer ownership, right? The first guy just used the axe. He didn't pass it on to somebody else. Therefore, even if someone else comes along, kula malu, they all committed me'ila. Not al hakardaim unasande lachavere. But if the first guy would have taken the axe and handed it off to his friend, so the me'ila would have happened as he transferred ownership to a friend, hu mal avachavere le'mal. So now, only he commits me'ila, but not the friend. Because here we go into the category of, if you passed it on to somebody else, hektish is done, doesn't own it anymore, and the second guy is not considered to be misappropriating. Similar example, shasa b'kois shalzav. You drank a golden cup, from a golden cup. You drank water from a golden cup of hektish, v'nena b'pruta, and had a pruta amount of pleasure. Uba chavere v'shasa v'nena, uba chavere v'shasa v'nena. Comes a second friend, also drinks from the cup, has pleasure. Comes a third friend, also drinks from the cup, also has pleasure. Kula malu, they've all committed me'ila. Because again, nobody handed it off to anybody else. Not al hakois. If the person, the original guy, would have taken the cup from hektish and gave it or sold it to a friend, now he's committed me'ila, but by transferring ownership, that's it. Hektish no longer owns it, and the second guy doesn't commit me'ila. And the same thing would apply in the third scenario of a donkey. Person rides a donkey, has pleasure, and also blemishes it. There's wear and tear on the animal every time you ride it. At the proper amount, he does the crime of me'ila. Comes the second guy, also takes a donkey ride, also blemishes, also benefits. Comes the third guy, his own donkey ride. So they have three guys, but nobody passed it on to each other. Kulamalu, they've all committed me'ila. But if the first guy would have taken the donkey and given it to his friend as a gift, or sold it, or even rented it, only he commits me'ila and not the friend. Also, if you lend an axe. Going back to the first example, the Rambam only before said, gave it to a friend. What if he lent it to a friend? He lent the axe to the friend. So he commits me'ila. Now he only commits me'ila not by the full price of the axe, but only based on the amount that the person would have paid to get it as a gift, as we had the other day. That sometimes the me'ila only goes down to the level of tevas hana. But the friend who you passed it off to, he's free. He can do whatever he wants. He can chop with the axe initially, because again, hektish lost its power over the object the moment the person transferred ownership. Now the first guy will have to pay for his crime, but that's it. Only he commits me'ila. For hu adin lebehema, same law applies to an animal as well. If it was lent out, the original person commits me'ila, but not the second guy. Now all these last two halachas were only about kodshe bedek habayis. Since it was given to temple upkeep, there's a difference between if it's inadvertent or purposeful, or if you handed it off or didn't hand it off. Halacha hey, behemas kodshe mizbeach ein okay. If we're dealing with an animal that was actually consecrated to be a sacrifice on the altar, none of these previous laws apply. The laws of misusing after misusing keep on applying till multiple times. Ketzad, what's an example? Talash min achatas, comes one guy, plucks some hair out of an animal that was meant to be a sin offering. Uba chavere v'talash, comes second guy, third guy, they're all plucking hair. Kulan malu, they've all committed me'ila. They're handing it off, they're giving it as gifts to each other. Doesn't matter how many ownership, how many hands it changes. Kulan malu, everybody commits me'ila. Says the Rambam even more. The Yirah Li, it seems to me that even though in the Talmud, all they talk about is animals, but the truth is, shedin hamenachos v'ha'oifos v'hanesachim u'klisharis. That the same law will apply to flower offerings, birds, libations like wine, oil, and actual holy utensils. Kedin habehema. They all have the same law as the animal. Shekulan kedushas haguf hein. Because all of these, when they become holy inherently. Their body becomes holy, and therefore, you misusing it 1 time, 2 times, 4 times, passing it over to different friends doesn't make a difference. The holiness remains, and the me'ila keeps on being committed by every single person anew. Halacha vav, behemas kodshe kodshim, shenafal b'mum. But if you would have an animal meant to be a sacrifice and gets a blemish, hoyil v'hi oimedes lepidyon, since it's going to be redeemed anyways, harehi kikodshe bed kabayis sheikdushas damim. It reverts back to the level of being like temple upkeep stuff, only holy for its monetary worth. And therefore, if it's passed to a friend and from a friend to a friend, harishan bilvad mal, only the first guy commits me'ilah, like the law is by regular kodshe bet kabayis. Halacha zayin, the Rambam gives us a riddle from the Talmud. There's a statement in the Talmud that seems puzzling, and the Rambam will explain it. Amru chachamim, our sages said, shahanoitel even oikoira shel hektish unesana lachaveiroi, that if a person takes a stone or a wooden beam of hektish and gives it to a friend, shneim ma'alu, they both commit me'ilah. Now, isn't that strange? What's a wood beam or a stone? Those are obviously kodshe bed kabayis. They're obviously going towards temple upkeep. And usually the law is by temple upkeep that if you pass it on to a friend, only the first guy does me'ilah. So how do we explain this statement? Furthermore, the sages said, v'im nasna lezeh hagizbar sha'isa tachas yadai, if the person who took the wood or stone gave it back to the treasurer who was originally holding it for hektish, didn't give it to another friend. He gave it back to the treasurer, hu mal v'hagizbar loy mal. Only he commits milah and not the treasurer. That's more classic kodshe bed kabayis. That kind of makes sense. Only me and not you. That's usually how it works. But how do we resolve this entire statement here? Where on the one hand, if you give it to another friend, both of you do me'ilah, but back to the treasurer, only you do me'ilah. So the Rambam explains this statement, it seems to me, that this is talking about a scenario where the original person did me'ilah purposely. In which case, the hektish never became profaned. So the first scenario is talking about a case of purposeful me'ilah, and purposeful me'ilah, even if he handed off to a friend, as you remember, the hektish doesn't go away. What about the treasurer? So the Rambam explains elsewhere, he doesn't go into it over here, but in his commentary to the Mishnah, he says that the treasurer, since he had it before already, so there's nothing new happening over here. By you passing it on to the treasurer, you're not giving him something new that he didn't have before. And therefore, there's no me'ilah on his behalf. But the general statement is talking about a case of me'ilah on purpose. Now, I should point out that the Kesef Mishnah himself, who's the primary commentary to the Rambam over here, understands the Rambam over here differently. And there's many other commentators that argue on the Rambam, Rashi and the Ravid, they explain this enigmatic statement to be referring to a case of shoygeg, and nevertheless they have a way to resolve it with the principle of kodshe bed kabayis. But the Rambam clearly says that it's talking about me'ilah b'zadain, purposeful me'ilah. And now we move on to the different scenarios of using hektish under the wrong impression. You think it's yours, and it's really belonging to hektish. So the Rambam begins with a scenario of a coin. You take a coin out of your pocket. It belongs to hektish, but you think it's yours. Now, let's say you put aside 10 coins to buy a sacrifice, and you put them back in your wallet for whatever reason, and now you pulled it out of your wallet to buy a soda in the store. So the Rambam says over here, Loimal ad sheyotzi oisa b'chafatzov. Me'ilah only happens the moment you actually spend it for your needs. Or until you actually give it as a gift. Taking it out of your wallet doesn't constitute a crime. If you would know that it's hektish and you still picked it up, okay, that's right there, you're already violating, you're already misappropriating hektish. But if you didn't know, the me'ilah only begins when you actually spend it. Because once it leaves your domain, doesn't matter, you know or you didn't know, you can't control it. You actually used something holy for your personal needs. But the me'ilah is delayed, it only happens later. And if you hand it off to a friend, only you commit milah, not your friend. Because again, anything not fit for the altar, there's no misusing after misusing, as we just explained. And the same thing applies to all similar situations. If you took a stone or a wooden beam belonging to hektish, just the taking doesn't constitute me'ilah. You didn't have pleasure yet. If you do something with it, you put it into your home that you're building, now you've committed me'ilah. What if you put it onto a little hollow area on the roof, but you didn't attach it? So you're building a sukkah. Sukkah is coming up now. Yeah, so on sukkahs, you never attach the roof beams to the actual sukkah. You just place it on top. So if you placed it on top, on the one end, you're already using it, it became part of your structure, but on the other end, it's not permanent. So the Rambam says, there's no me'ilah until you actually live under that beam. You make use of having that beam at the worth of a pruta, she'ein zu hana ani keres, because otherwise, just placing it is not a recognizable, clear benefit. Halacha tes, not al pruta shel hektish, unesan ala balam. You took a hektish coin and you gave it to the bathhouse attendant. Okay, think about it today. I mean, in our mikveh here, we don't have it, but in some mikvahs in major communities, they have these turnstiles. Right? You can't get in unless you pay the money. So you paid the money, you gave the money to the bathhouse attendant, but then you're like, you know what? I forgot my towel at home or whatever. I can't go to mikveh now. You don't end up using the bathhouse that day. So you might think that it's like the coin that we said before, that you're only going to be liable once you spend it. Here, you didn't spend it, even though you gave it to the attendant, but you didn't make use of it. Nevertheless, says the Rambam Ma'al, you've committed me'ilah right here and now. Because the fact that now you can go in and get a free mikveh use, that's already a pleasure. Not right now, but it'll be later. Same thing if you gave the coin to any artisan, any craftsman, and you didn't end up taking the product which they were offering. Ma'al, you've still committed me'ilah, afal pisha adayin le'asu malachta, even if they didn't do your work yet, because they will do the work. And an advance payment is also considered to be a pleasure. Halacha yud, kana ba chayfetz v'lei mashach. What if you actually bought an object, but you didn't do meshicha? We'll have this much more in great detail in the Rambam's book about acquiring and transactions. But a basic rule of halacha when it comes to buying and selling is that min ha-Torah, biblically, just giving money for an object gets you the object. But the rabbis were worried that once the owner gets the money, he won't protect the object for the buyer. So they said that it only becomes the buyer's after Meshicha, after he actually draws it into his possession. But that law was only enacted for Jews. For Gentiles, the law remained the same as it's in its biblical sense. So therefore the Rambam says, how does this apply to me'ilah? If you use inadvertently a hektish coin to buy an object, but you didn't do Meshicha, if you buy it from a Gentile, so that's it. The moment you give the money, transaction is done. Therefore, you've committed me'ilah. But if it's from a Jew, there's no me'ilah until you actually do Meshicha. Because only then is the transaction finished. If you spend hektish money for your own needs, thinking that they're actually mundane, even if you didn't spend them on weekday activities or mundane things, ma'al, you still committed me'ilah. Even if you did something holy with the money, doesn't matter, you misused holy things. What's an example of that? Ketzad. You bought a korban. You literally bought a sacrifice. You go and you buy a sin offering or a guilt offering or a Passover offering using hektish money. Or a person that needed to bring a sacrifice for ritual impurity brings his sacrifice using hektish money. Mal, there's still me'ilah. Because again, you thought, you were under the impression that it's unholy money, and that's why you used it. But in all these scenarios with the sacrifice, just like the other stuff where you're only liable once you spend it or whatever, so here also you're only liable once the blood of the sacrifice was sprinkled. Because only then is it a kosher fully sacrifice. Lefikach, therefore, if you were to buy flour offerings or wine and oil or bread for a Thanksgiving offering using hektish money, even though you've committed a sin, there's no me'ilah. Because there's no blood sprinkling, obviously, by flour and wine and oil. So there's no kapara moment, there's no achievement of atonement. And therefore, there's no moment where the money is actually fully used. And therefore, it's an avera, but it's no me'ilah. Halacha Yud Beis, we conclude the chapter with laws related to machatzis hashekel. So way back in the Rambam's third book, there was a whole section of laws called Hilchos Shkalim, where we saw that every Jew was obligated to give a half shekel coin towards the communal sacrifices for the year. And Jews would put them in these 3 big golden boxes, from which they would take, the Kohanim would take and fill up 3 sacks, and buy the sacrifices for the year. So now let's see how these laws play into me'ilah. Nasan shiklei mima'is hektish. A person gives his machzis shekel, he pays up his dues using hektish money. He didn't realize. He used holy money to fulfill his personal machzah shekel due. When does me'ilah happen? When does the crime actually happen? Says the Rambam, Yisremu hatruma. When they end up taking the actual truma, which means removing the coins from these boxes and putting them into the sacks. Ve'yiknu mimena afilu behema achas, and they buy even one animal. Ve'yizarek dama, and the blood is sprinkled. Yimal hashekel. That's when the person who gave the shekel coins does me'ilah. In other words, there has to be at least a sprinkling of even one sacrifice from that money. Shaharei chelkoi be'oisa habehema shenizrak dama. Because the whole idea of half shekel coins is that every Jew has a portion in every communal sacrifice. So that first animal which is blood is sprinkled, you have a part in it. So you're doing me'ilah at that moment. What if you put aside your half shekel coin from regular money? All good. But it's holy now. And then you spend that coin, that half shekel coin, for other things. Whether it's you or someone else, there's me'ilah. What if you gave a friend, you trusted him? You're staying somewhere else in Israel, he's going to Jerusalem, so you say, hey, you know what, I have to pay up my dues, here's my half shekel coin, go give it to the temple on my behalf. Unbeknownst to you, your friend is poor, doesn't have any money. It's like, you know what, what's the guy going to know? I'll give it for my shekel coin. He goes and he gives the coin for himself, on his own behalf, not on your behalf. Now the problem is that when you gave it to your friend, you already put it aside in your mind for half shekel. So it's already holy. By the friend using it for himself, he's doing me'ilah. He's misusing holy money. So the Rambam says it depends when he does it. If your friend reaches Jerusalem, after they've already done the truma, they've already taken the initial 3 sacks from the 3 boxes, ma'al hashekel. Then there's me'ilah the moment the person hands off the coin on his own behalf. As we explained in the laws of shekel coins, when the Kohen does this, he has in mind that it should cover all the coins, even the ones that haven't come yet. So since the truma was done, they've all been declared holy, but the person giving it on his own behalf, he's misused holy money. It's as though the coin already reached the chamber, therefore there's me'ilah. But if the Kohanim didn't separate the truma yet, there's no me'ilah. Because in a way, you put it aside for yourself. But actually, the truma wasn't separated. So it never became fully holy. And therefore, there's no me'ilah. Either way, says the Rambam, these parts in the sack are called trumas halishka, the separation of the chamber. Whatever money remains and doesn't make it into these sacks is called shiare halishka, left over. That money is not holy at any rate. And if you misuse it, it's not considered to be doing me'ilah.